everybody muted. We're going to have everybody muted for the duration of the presentation. If you have any questions that come up while the presenter is presenting or towards the end, when we have a question and answer session, please go ahead and type those out in the chat box. And then we will be sharing a Google form with you during and at the end. If you could just fill out that Google form, it's a small survey about our webinar series and about the presentation today. So with that, I am honored to present our speaker for today. So our speaker today is Ms. Janice Edwards. She is a certified genetic counselor and a clinical professor in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the School of Medicine, Columbia in South Carolina. She is also the director of the University of South Carolina Masters of Genetic Counseling program, which is one of the oldest genetic counseling programs in the United States. Janice has special interest in international development of genetic counseling, and that's why she is the absolute best person we could get for this presentation today. She is the founder of the Transnational Alliance for Genetic Counseling, which was founded in 2006. And among her numerous accolades and achievements, she has been honored by the National Society of Genetic Counselors with the 2000 for the Regional Leadership Award, and in 2010 with the International Award. So Janice is just going to be, I am very excited and looking forward to her presentation because I think she is going to give us some really good information on becoming a genetic counselor in the United States. And the reason we wanted someone to come and talk about this important topic is because a lot of the questions we get in the online Google form that the attendees complete have to do with, what does it take to become a genetic counselor? So I'm hoping that all of those questions get answered today with Janice's presentation. So with that introduction, Janice, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Mila. Thank you so much for inviting me to give this talk also. I am also very excited to have the opportunity and to share with you, and then to also see what all the natural questions are, to see if I might be of help to the audience in any way that I can. When you say one of the oldest programs in the country, that just amazes me because we were the 10th program in the country at University of South Carolina, and I always felt like the new kid on the block. But as you'll see from this presentation, the United States has developed well over 50 programs now, and we are one of the oldest. And then this year is special to me because I celebrated my 40th year practicing as a genetic counselor, and that surprised me at how much that affected me, that was such a round and very big and long number, that I have felt very privileged to be in this profession as long as I have, to watch its growth and be part of its growth, and then to also think about how much has changed and is still changing. So I am going to share what I can with you, mostly focused on the United States, but I also hope that I will be able to help everybody understand a little bit about international development as well. So I don't know why. There. I just reordered our learning outcomes from the flyer just slightly. I'm going to talk first about the genetic counselor and roles for genetic counselors that have grown exponentially over the first 50 years of this career. And then I'm going to get into what does it take to become a genetic counselor? What goes into the training of a genetic counselor? What are the skills of a genetic counselor? And lastly, focus on what are we looking for in graduate education in the applicants? What's the process of interviewing and matching in the United States, at least? And of course, my experience and expertise is in the United States, but I've had a long-term relationship with programs all over the world, and I am also happy to answer what questions I can about other potential educational opportunities in other countries, though I certainly don't have expertise in all countries. Well, you may know this program or this profession started in 1971, literally 50 years ago. There were 6 graduates out of the Sarah Lawrence program. And today there's over 5,000 certified genetic counselors in the US. We think that the profession is growing exponentially. We think we're going to have about 7,500 in just a few years and over 10,000. So currently in those 50 plus programs, over 500 genetic counselors are entering the field annually. And we have watched a huge growth in the number of programs in recent years, and it hasn't slowed down. There's still many programs under development. So we might even see a little bit faster growth than we expected when we made these numbers. But the profession has evolved in 50 years to include all of the elements of a full medical profession, including a professional society that represents the interests of genetic counselors and provides the continuing education to genetic counselors. But also we have evolved a system of standards for education, a process for national certification. And in the United States, with 50 different states, about half of our states have developed actual licensure for this professional. So over many, many decades, we have developed all of the elements that go into a full and complete, robust profession. I mention that because while this profession started in the United States, it's now been established in countries all over the world. And I think it has grown faster than it would have typically because we have the experience from what we've gone through in the US to be able to share with others, and not only literature, but text, and also just professional experience. I'm always very humble to say that our experience is not the same as all countries. And everybody has their own health system, their own government politics, medical systems, etc. But I'm hopeful that the experience of a robust profession in the US has been able to help other groups take from it and learn from it to apply to their own countries. So we're watching it grow as well in many countries around the world. This is a 2017 paper in which we documented the growth of the genetic counseling profession in other regions of the world. And I kept the hyperlink here. I'm hoping that would be helpful to you to be able to look at that paper exactly, because it goes through country by country. What do we know about genetic counselors practicing and education programs, etc. This paper is being honored this coming week, I believe it is, at the European Society of Human Genetics as the most often cited paper of 2020, 2021. So it's an amazing thing that a lot of people are interested in genetic counseling in other countries and the development of this profession across the globe. Marla mentioned the Transnational Alliance for Genetic Counseling. I just want to speak to what it is. We recognized back in the mid-2000s that there was a lot of development across the world in genetic counseling, and we felt that the spirit and the professional zeal for genetic counseling was similar among individuals that were interested wherever they were in the world. And we brought those people together, folks that were developing programs, folks that had established new programs, and we formed what's called the Transnational Alliance, or the TAGC. And this is simply a network of professionals interested in the education of genetic counselors and the global development of the profession. But at the website, which I didn't provide the URL, I apologize for that. It's tagc.med.sc.edu. You can find countries where genetic counseling programs have developed, along with contact information for program directors and the universities in which they are housed. And this is a continually evolving website, so that we try to keep up to date with that information, so that if an individual was seeking work in one country where there might already be an established profession, or if an individual wanted to educate themselves in a country other than their own, they could also connect with those individuals. But most importantly, that all of the countries that are interested in training genetic counselors are connected and able to collaborate with each other. And that's simply what the TAGC is. It's a collaboration network. Well, before we get into how do you become a genetic counselor, what does it take to train a genetic counselor, I want to just make sure we're all on the same page in terms of what are we doing as genetic counselors, and in particular, how do we serve our patients? And how do we serve the physicians, the healthcare systems in which we work? Because I think they go hand in hand. Most of us think about the direct patient care as the reason we want to be a genetic counselor. We are interested in these things. And most of us realize that we aren't impacting patients and their families one-on-one. But I also like to bring out the point that we're impacting healthcare systems. We're coming alongside the physicians and the other healthcare providers to facilitate genetic education and decision-making. So you might be familiar with some of these concepts where a genetic counselor is able to teach about genetic principles and provide support to individuals, not only psychosocial support, but find resources for them as they figure out genetic testing, make sure they understand all their options and they can decide which is the best route for them to take. But as a genetic counselor and somebody well versed in genetic testing, I can also help them select the best test, the best laboratory for the study to be performed at. Of course, it's a personal decision. There's often complex issues involved with genetic testing and the interactions that we have with our patients, including sometimes ethical and legal issues. And I am also a person that can help work with them as they traverse laboratory costs, insurance if they have that to cover their costs, or find ways to get things done if they don't have the means. And most importantly, continue to provide psychosocial support. Again, my point is not only the obvious that it's helping a patient, but it's helping a healthcare system. And this becomes increasingly important as you think about becoming an adjunct professional that works along with a geneticist or other physician to deliver care. What do we do with our patients? We are really going through a process all together with our patients. And I thought I would explain the patient I saw this past Friday, who is a 25-year-old, presented because the father, who she never knew, died at age 39 of Huntington's disease. And she has been struggling with anxiety about the potential of having inherited that gene for Huntington's. We've been on the phone multiple times where we've been building rapport and connecting with each other about all of her thoughts and feelings. But Friday she presented in person with a support person, having met with her psychologist over many sessions to be ready to go ahead and do genetic testing with that individual's support while she's waiting for results. Now, I'm not a clinician, so I'm not doing physical examination. And in this case, I work connected with my neurologist who did a baseline physical exam for her to determine whether she had any physical signs or symptoms of Huntington's disease. And thankfully, she did not. He also went through her medical history, her medication history, her psychiatric history, assessing whether or not it might be an appropriate time or not, whether or not she had the appropriate support. And embedded with her parents, her stepfather and her mother, and with her psychologist in the background, we felt like she was very clear in the reasoning why she wanted testing. In establishing the family history, we learned more psychosocially that her father left early in her life. She doesn't remember him past the age of 6 years old. And she never knew anything about Huntington's disease until she learned at the end of his life that he was dying from the condition. So no lived experience, and only what she could explore on the websites, which of course are overwhelming when you think about it as a neurodegenerative disorder. So our work together that day was not only to teach about the genetics of Huntington's, what is a CAG, triplet repeat disorder, and how do we actually test for it in a molecular laboratory, what kind of results would come back from that, including positive, negative, borderline, and normal but mutable, and gave her working knowledge of triplet repeat disorder as it relates to Huntington's disease. Talking through her options to not do that testing today as a young person starting her career, or perhaps instead enroll in international observational study where she could be participating and connecting to the community, but not know her results yet. Gave her options, in other words. But in the process of really sorting it through, she remained steadfast in her decision to go forward. And so we moved forward with the consent process as we planned how to manage the time when she's waiting for these results. Blood was drawn Friday, and she won't learn her results for probably about 4 weeks when she'll come back in person to receive them. So she and her psychologist will be meeting in that interim, along with her parents supporting her. I'll be talking to her on the phone. And once we get back together, we will be, for good or for bad, positive or negative, providing support resources as we do the results disclosure. But just an example of impactful, complete 90 minutes face-to-face discussion with a patient, which explains the substantial nature of what is genetic counseling. It's a very engaged process that is, for most in the US system, much more time consumed than a physician would be able to spend with the patient. And therefore, it's a good adjunct to the physician, and in this case, neurologist, who would typically see a Huntington's patient. Of course, it doesn't all happen face-to-face with the patient, and just like every healthcare profession, we have a lot of work to do behind the scenes, not only gathering information by reviewing medical records or obtaining medical records, studying a condition. No one of us walks around with all genetic knowledge in our head. We are daily doing research on the web for current information on the conditions that we're working with our patients. And then finding good materials to give patients. There's a lot of background getting ready for a patient and a lot of after face-to-face time with the patient. If we're going to coordinate a test, the genetic counselor is literally usually the one selecting the molecular test that's appropriate for the patient. And that includes not only the science of the molecular condition, but it includes deciding which laboratory is the appropriate laboratory for that patient sample to go to, which may be based on the experience of the laboratory, the types of conditions or genes that are screened in a particular test. It may be dictated by that patient's insurance or what the patient's coverage are, and how quickly I might get that test result back. So a genetic counselor literally is in many ways a gatekeeper for the genetic testing that's being done. Hopefully being able to provide the right testing for that patient, and therefore being prepared to also present the results to that patient. Just like any medical interaction, you're documenting all your work. So not only are you in the medical record documenting the sessions, but you may be writing lay language letters that explain to your patient what the test results mean. So often we'll say, tuck this away for your family's future in the important papers that you have in a letter written for the patient. Similarly, as an advocate for patients, and sometimes our interaction with our insurance companies include that the medical professionals are writing letters to explain to the insurance company why a genetic test is important and is important to the management of the patient's condition. So lots of behind the scenes, lots of knowledge and skill that's required in order to do not only the face-to-face, but all that goes around it. In the US, there's 3 primary clinical settings where genetic counselors are working. And I name these because when you survey genetic counselors and you learn about where are they working, what are they doing, you see every time you survey them change and growth in the field. And I'll give you the example that prenatal genetics has been the largest employer setting for genetic counselors in the US for many years, but it was eclipsed by cancer genetics in the last several. So that a third of counselors are in prenatal, but 44% are doing cancer genetics. In pediatric genetics, medical genetics has stayed relatively the same over many, many years, and I count that too. We have a similar number of children being born with conditions. It doesn't change, but we have a lot more knowledge on how to manage and prevent cancer, for instance, so that many cancer centers are hiring genetic counselors to make sure their patients get cared for appropriately. Most of us that came to genetic counseling came to see patients. That's the interest that you bring to the field, is you want to serve these patients. And I present these as the most common settings that individuals are served in. And therefore, when we start talking about training, these are the most common areas in which genetic counselors are trained. But we've really extended ourselves into multiple specialties. So you'll see from this list that you name a medical specialty, a genetic counselor could probably serve some capacity in that medical specialty. I've described neurology to you when I talk about Huntington's disease, but these other conditions are also, these other specialty areas are also vastly growing in the need for genetic counselors. And therefore, all of us doing training are also trying to touch on these areas while we're doing training, so that genetic counselors see their potential for being part of these subspecialties, I'll call them, in medicine. If you look at the 2020 professional status survey from the National Society of Genetic Counselors, what you'll find out is that about half of the US counselors are doing face-to-face direct patient care. Well, I won't say face-to-face, I'll say direct patient care. That includes telemedicine. And about 25% are in other roles that are not direct patient care. So there's been a significant evolution of the field so that genetic counselors can use their training and their skills, their knowledge base, to affect other areas of medicine. And then several counselors have a mix where they both do direct patient care and other roles as well. The majority work full-time. What would be nice to see up here, and especially after 2021 is over, is how many genetic counselors are working in face-to-face settings versus remote, because that's also a very vastly changing area, not just spurred by COVID, but very fast changing in terms of multiple roles for counselors, not always in face-to-face institutional settings. What are some of these roles outside of what I would call clinical? Many genetic counselors are in genetic test laboratories. And in the US, we have both academic laboratories and commercial genetic laboratories. All of them employ genetic counselors. And these are frontline people that are not only helping make sure that the test that was ordered was the actual correct test to be done for that patient. So interfacing with the referring physician who's ordered to make sure the right testing is done, but also helping that physician or whoever it is on the other end of the phone, trying to access a genetic test. Sometimes it's a genetic counselor asking another genetic counselor, what's the best way for me to go with this patient? So they're also revealing those results back out, helping physicians who might not be genetics trained to have the information they need to share with the patient for that genetic test. Of course, I'm a good example of a genetic counselor who does education. I'm not only training 18 graduate students a year, I'm also facilitating genetic education for maternal fetal medicine fellows in an online course that has over 100 fellows in it. So I see patients, but I also provide education, and many counselors do so as well. Sales representative, that's one way of putting it. A lot of genetic counselors work for commercial laboratories where they are medical science liaisons. They actually are using their knowledge and skills to help physicians who would possibly be ordering genetic tests to learn more about the new technologies or new tests that are coming out, new abilities to test. And of course, sales is part of any commercial laboratory that's visiting a doctor's office or helping a community understand the new test. And often it's a genetic counselor that's delivering that education as part of that sales representation for the laboratory. Counselors also are involved in creating public policy, not only in their local state level, but in their national level as well. Many years ago, we developed a state law to prevent genetic discrimination in South Carolina. And that was eclipsed in 2008 by the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, a federal law that prevents genetic discrimination in health insurance. But genetic counselors, because they understand genetics, they can explain it to lay audiences. That translates really well to be able to explain to policymakers the importance of genetics and our lives and our health and our well-being. As the profession has grown, you can imagine administration becomes part of it. You administer groups of genetic counselors. I am amazed that I work now in a group of 8 genetic counselors.
Excuse me, Janice.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're getting some comments in the chat that there's a bit of an echo. Is there any way you can, I don't know, move possibly closer or adjust any of your settings?
Not sure. I'm not very far away from my screen, so I can.
Okay, well, I'm not sure. It seems like it's fine for some people, but some people are hearing an echo. So it's a bit of a mix. So it might be a problem on the receiving end, but
Yeah, I don't hear any echo, not using any extra technology.
okay, got it. It's fine for me right now. So
Yeah.
maybe we should just continue. Thank
I
you.
did,
Sorry.
I did move a little bit closer to the screen. so-
Okay, yeah, that's better actually. Thank you.
Okay, okay, thank you. And I'm not able to see the chat, so I'm sorry. Mila, you'll please, interrupt me anytime with any questions like that. I will mention that utilization management is a growing role in the United States, and just simply describe that for you. Insurance, medical insurance, health insurance is very important in our communities, and health insurance companies very much want to contain their costs. So they have hired genetic counselors to make policy and review genetic test requests and create the process for appropriate genetic testing to be funded by the insurance companies. And this has created an entirely new avenue, for instance, for genetic counselors that probably didn't exist 10 years ago. So I imagine these roles are going to continue to evolve. Many of these roles we wouldn't have expected when we first started out in my career 40 years ago, but I expect them to continue to evolve and change over time. All of us are typically involved in multiple roles besides face-to-face interaction. I just mentioned a few here. Examples being, we go out and give talks, especially at 10th grade biology classes in high schools and colleges where we're talking about careers for genetics, possibly engaging individuals in a potential future career as a genetic counselor. Our own program connects to our communities. Our students and faculty were at a blood drive for sickle cell disease yesterday, really wanting to make sure our public, where we serve our patients, the public is aware of genetic counselors and their services. Of course, several of us are training genetic counselors either in teaching faculty roles or in clinical supervision, where we're coaching genetic counselors, working with patient advocacy or perhaps professional advocacy. I had mentioned earlier that genetic counselors in about half of the United States have licensure in their states for the profession, and the others that do not are fielding ways that they can develop licensure for genetic counseling, feeling like that's one of the last areas for final professionalization of this field. We have many professional organizations, which I'm going to mention to you a little bit further on, and each of those are leadership opportunities to continue to help evolve the field, as is just like in every other medical field, working in the literature and either contributing as an author or helping to edit or peer review in a journal. Typical academic extraneous roles as well. We have a professional society, the National Society of Genetic Counselors, which not only helps move the profession forward, creates practice guidelines for us, but also helps us develop our continuing skills and our continuing education so that This has become a first step in the professionalization of genetic counselors in the United States, where this collective voice now represents and is a place for practicing counselors to go to for information, resources, and support. Who gets drawn to become a genetic counselor? I think there's some common characteristics. I think people that are genetic counselors have an interest in the human interaction, and they have that compassionate want to be part of somebody's life's decisions as they grapple with genetic issues. I consider it a true privilege when I get to talk with somebody about their genetic information and how it affects them personally or in their family. I think we have an ability to critically think and make good decisions. I think a genetic counselor is a person that can puzzle things together quite easily, that likes to take pieces of information, sort that out, who likes to ferret out information in a family history, who likes to be complete and thorough and is very specific and concrete in the way that they puzzle things out. Obviously, I think it's very obvious you'd have to have good communication skills, and that's something that you have on some level, but you also can be trained to do. And then not only do you need a science interest, a medicine interest, you really do need to be fascinated with genetics. And I remember that was one of the main things that I felt when I became a genetic counselor was I was fascinated with the science of genetics, and I remain fascinated at all we've learned in these 40 years I've practiced and how exciting it is. And as a matter of fact, I don't know very many genetic professionals that want to retire because it is so fascinating. And that's probably the most common, the common thing that comes to us as genetic counselors. Well, how do you get going in this field? Of course, you have to have both your high school and a four-year college degree, an undergraduate degree, before you embark on a Master of Science in Genetic Counseling. Once that degree is achieved, there is a certification process. I'm referring to the United States, and there are other registration processes in other countries as well. And in the US, it is an examination that an individual takes upon obtaining their master's degree. Once certified by the American Board of Genetic Counseling, that certification remains something that you have to review or recertify through continuing education or repeating the examination. And then in some of the states of the United States, you would be required to license in that state in order to be able to practice and call yourself a genetic counselor. And as other states obtain licensure, that will continue to evolve. But each of these things are the rudimentary steps to the profession. Now, what are the programs? They're all master's programs. What they call their degree might vary slightly, but they are all essentially the same Master of Science programs. There's about 55 right now between the US and 4 in Canada. All are accredited by the Accreditation Council for Genetic Counseling. And the vast majority of them are 21 months, 2 academic years. There's only a few that really are online or have some sort of hybrid. So these are by and large, full-time only, face-to-face training programs. And there's just a couple that are longer than 2 years, but in general, they're very similar in design and content. The coursework includes basically 2 tracks that is the medical genetics information and the counseling skills development. Of course, it varies to include things like managing cases, which there's an ethical or legal issue, appreciating contemporary problems in genetic counseling. We're an evolving, changing field. We're an evolving area of medicine. And we will always be part of the conversation in developing how to manage or what are the new policies related to these issues. It has included evolution of content. For instance, 20 years ago, we didn't teach cancer genetics, but it's a huge part of what we're teaching today, as is genomics. So it's an evolving curriculum that has to keep up with our evolving field. Fieldwork experience means being exposed to patients, observing other practice professionals interact with patients, and it also means providing counseling yourself while somebody who is certified is with you and can coach you along and make sure patient is served appropriately. And that will probably be in those three main areas I mentioned, prenatal cancer and pediatric genetics, because those are the most common areas of medicine and genetic counseling right now. But it also includes the specialty roles I referred to. It includes laboratory roles, industry roles, and that will vary program to program in terms of what kind of experiences that they have. Most of our students, and I can only really speak for my program, spend the first year observing a lot of the genetic counseling. We put them into full-time rotations in the summer where they're 6 weeks, 40 hours a week seeing patients. And then during their senior year, they're 3 days a week seeing patients. And by the end of that 21 months, if you think about how short of that period, they have themselves counseled probably 150 patients over multiple specialties. So they gain a lot of it, supported experience in that very short period of time and a lot of capability. We are very tied to genetic counselors need to be able to interpret research. Genetic counselors need to understand the research process. And therefore, many of the programs, including my own, have a full-on original Master of Science research project as part of the curriculum, where a student creates a question, works with a 3-member faculty committee to deliver data and results that are often then either presented nationally or hopefully published to share with the greater literature. Some programs don't have a master's thesis project, but have another type of project, often called a capstone project. But all of these are related to the fact that genetic counselors need to understand the research process, need to be able to manage large projects and bring them to fruition. And most importantly, learn how to manage collaborating with others as part of an interdisciplinary, interprofessional team, which is what we all are as we come out into practice. So most of these programs will follow similar 21-month curricula. And this curricula has been defined by the Accreditation Council for Genetic Counseling, which creates the standards for genetic counseling training programs. I bring this to your attention because the ACGC standards defines what has to be part of a genetic counselor's training. So for anybody that's interested in developed training, wants to understand what's going into the training of a genetic counselor, who wants to explore whether or not they have interest in being a genetic counselor, I think going to all of these professional societies and seeing what's on these sites is going to be helpful to them. The ACGC, again, establishes what has to be part of the curriculum of a genetic counseling training program. And they come through the programs on a regular basis every 8 years at least, and affirm that the program has evolved to the current state that we should be training in, is continuing to evolve their curriculum according to the state of the art, and that is putting the quality into the training of the counselor. My program is under reaccreditation review right now. I've spent the last 6 months looking at our curriculum with a national committee of about 28 individuals who have all helped us evaluate and make suggestions for continuing to evolve and position this older program for the current date. And I will be site visited soon by the ACGC. All of this is meant to strengthen this program for the future. And it's a very solid and robust process that has evolved through the Accreditation Council. I want you to know especially about the Accreditation Council for Genetic Counseling's practice-based competencies. And why I want you to know them is I want you to understand what goes into the training of a genetic counselor, and I want you to know what is driving the training programs and what genetic counselors do in practice. In essence, these are divided into 4 main categories, not only just genetic knowledge, but also ability to interact and counsel, including psychosocial counseling, to assist the patients. Every time you talk to a patient, you're doing education, but also as you educate others, either lay audiences or professional audiences about genetics. So we have strong roles in education. And then we are a profession that we have to think about our professional development as genetic counselors. So in essence, the practice-based competencies are literally 22 knowledge and skill content areas that a person who graduates from a training program should be able to do upon graduation. And these are important because they actually are how we design our programs. We want our graduates to be able to do these things. And it's also how we assess our students and their evaluation along those 21 months with us. So every test, every fieldwork evaluation, thesis research work is considering these practice-based competencies as a student progresses through 21 months. You can find them on the ACGC website. There's actually a link here where you can download the 22 PBCs, we call them. And I would encourage you to do that, especially if you're interested in what goes into training a genetic counselor, but most especially if you're interested in becoming a genetic counselor. I just took a screenshot of this, which gives you kind of a flavor for what they look like. These are in first person, what you would be able to do upon graduation. And so for somebody considering genetic counseling, this would be a good way to think through, are these things that I think I might want to be able to do with patients? And are these things of interest to me? And would I want to be able to have this ability? Is this a satisfying career for me? When my students start their master's program, I actually tell them, you need to print these, you need to put them around your mirror so you see them every morning, because these are absolutely your goals for the 21 months that you're with us. And everything we are doing are focused on this. By the time you're in your last semester with us in February, March, before you graduate in May, we will actually evaluate where you are on the achievement of competencies. And in the beginning of your training, you probably are very uncertain. You're probably needing lots of support. But by the end of your training, most of the time, we're able to say you're independently doing these skills and have this knowledge. So please be aware of the practice-based competencies as an important definition of what is genetic counseling in the United States. These PBCs also inform our certification process. I mentioned before a test that we take after we earn our master's degree to become certified genetic counselors. That is administered by an entirely different organization called the American Board of Genetic Counseling. But the practice-based competencies are also informing what test questions are asked of a genetic counselor to become a certified counselor. So literally there are themes throughout the training of genetic counselors, and therefore should be considered by anyone considering developing a training program, but also anybody considering becoming a genetic counselor. These are our underpinning. Well, how do I become a genetic counselor? What goes into admissions, etc.? I told you you have to have a bachelor's degree before you can apply. Most of our applicants are typically kind of pre-medicine interests. They already knew they're interested in healthcare and medicine. They often will have a science background, although that's not required in any way. Some of the best genetic counselors I've graduated were really different majors, like communication majors, chemistry majors, etc. Prerequisite coursework is going to vary a little bit program to program, but the ones I listed here are not uncommon. You have to have certain background in order to build upon your knowledge to take it to the next level in Master of Science Genetic Counseling. You see a lot of emphasis on science, don't you, with little emphasis on psychology. And that's mostly because you're building that science knowledge in a genetic counseling. The graduate record exam is a standardized test. There's a wave going on right now for a lot of programs that this may not be required or is not required or is optional. This is a changing area right now. It'll be interesting to see if it goes away completely. But one of the things you'll hear from me is that each program is different. You have to really get onto their websites and study the differences in order to ascertain whether or not it's a program you want to apply to. Most applicants are strong students. They typically are absolutely 3.0 and above. But when you really look at the ones that are accepted and matriculate into the US programs, are typically in a 3.5 or above grade point average on a 4-point scale. If you're applying from another country to a US program and you don't have a 4-point scale in your undergrad degree, it's helpful if you can please provide some sort of translation, and there are organizations that do that for you. Every program requires a personal statement that wants to hear your story, that wants to hear why you think genetic counseling is the right field that matches your interest and your skills. They want to hear your story and how you became interested in it. They want to hear experiences you've had that are related to it. I especially want to see through a personal statement that the individual can write. That is part of communication, and that can write well and has a maturity of thought and sophistication of understanding of what is medical genetics. Because these programs are so small, we're very, very interested in making sure that the people that come into the field have a very good understanding of what it is, and therefore will more likely be successful in finishing the 21-month degree. Yes, of course, we need letters of recommendation as well. That should not just be undergrad professors, but be people that you have worked with otherwise. And even if perhaps a genetic professional would be helpful in adding to your application. Most programs really are looking and will vary in whether they say they require, but really do expect, I would say, adjunct experiences besides your undergraduate degree to become competitive as a genetic counselor. In other words, we want to know that an individual has really explored whether or not they can work with the public in a counseling type relationship, perhaps through crisis counseling or working with individuals outside of their regular undergrad college community, but have actually worked with the public dealing with difficult situations and realize that they enjoy that and they want to work one-on-one with individuals who are struggling with medical issues or other issues. Sometimes it's helpful to be working in a genetics laboratory, even if you're not a technician, maybe even just participating in a genetics laboratory so that you can understand more about the actual process itself. Research, or knowing what research is, either in your undergraduate years or postgraduate years, is important. Not necessarily required. None of these are absolutely required. But I would say exposure to the field is very important. So talking to genetic counselors, shadowing if you can, doing an internship if you can. We have something called genetic counseling assistants, which is an area that's really evolved in the US, where prospective students work or volunteer with genetic counselors as their assistants, and they can really learn what goes into the behind the scenes and in front of the patient activities. Any type of experience that can expose you to medical genetics over a longer period of time is outstanding, because at that point you become more conversant with what is the genetic counseling profession and what is your connection to it. You become more sophisticated in your understanding of it, and that will shine through in your personal statement and hopefully your interview if you're lucky enough to be selected to one. I'm again speaking about just US, North American processes when I'm talking about what are some tips for you. But I really do think, and I say this all the time forever and ever to students, that you really do need to apply to multiple programs in order to have the best likelihood of being admitted. And that's not an easy thing to say, because every time you apply, it's a cost, and I understand that. So you have to work it through in your own, what works for you, but the increased number of programs you apply to increases your chances. Students literally have to do some online homework, and you hear our applicants talk about the spreadsheets that they've created. They got online with the different programs, they explored their prereqs, their cost, what the program curriculum looked like, etc. How many students do they accept? Geography tends to be really important, but in the end, students really digged into what's the cost and the variation between the programs. So you can't get that in one place. You really have to do that program by program to study, and I'm going to show you where you can go to look at all the programs. But you can also take advantage of other websites from the professional societies. So the National Society of Genetic Counselors website is a no-brainer. That's the representative of the profession US. So to understand more about the field, I would explore that site. Genetic counselors list themselves as open to students there, so you can email genetic counselors who are open, and they'll start to interact with you to teach you a little bit more about it. But you can also access things like the Master Genetic Counseling series. There's a series of videos of genetic counselors in different settings where you can actually view, quote unquote, a role-play genetic counseling session to get a better sense of what would that interaction be like. So my point is to study what you can online. There's a lot of information online, more than ever before. And students get a lot from this type of homework that they do. We are very interested in people that have, like I say, maturity of focus in their career plan. So often I don't discourage people from taking a year or two and getting some experience to get prepared for genetic counseling. Yes, we take students directly from their 4-year undergrad into the master's degree program. We absolutely do. But we equally look at people that have been out for a few years with some other adjunct experiences that they might bring into the program, and with some maturity of thought from these exposures, they may take our student body up to a different level. So we encourage experience when we think about the training programs. When you decide to apply, it's usually a fall, end of the year decision. Most of the programs, and when you develop a spreadsheet, you'll figure this out. You're gonna put their due dates. They're usually December or January. Programs are evaluating a lot of applications and are only able to select a small number. My own program, we had 165 applications last year, and we interviewed 42 people. So I know from the very beginning of looking at a body of applications that there are great people that are not being interviewed. And it's a very difficult process from a training program point of view. It's very competitive, but I say that not to be discouraging. I say it to be realistic. It's a very competitive process. And we know when we're reviewing applications that they're quality people that probably are not getting an opportunity to interview. Again, another reason why it's important to apply to multiple programs. In the US, we now have a national match program. So if you're going to apply in the United States, you will have to participate in the match. That's a separate registration, and I'll point that out in just a minute. But in essence, what it is, you register for the national match service. You, after you interview at different programs, you actually provide to the matching service what your preference list is. I would prefer to go to this program if I have the opportunity. It's my #1 program, but I'm willing to go to this second program and this third program if I'm given those opportunities. But please don't put me down for that fourth one I interviewed in. I don't think I'm a good match. I'm going to leave that off my list altogether. The programs that interviewed you are also going to submit a list, and the computer is going to match us. And one day in late April, you and I, the programs and the applicants, are going to get an email that says this set of students is coming to this program, and you will know exactly which program that you're going to. That's called a national match. We've had it for now 3 to 4 years. And it actually works quite well. So I think it's different to think about if you haven't had any exposure to it, but I want to encourage you that it's a process that works quite well. And last thing I'll mention about admissions is we went to Zoom this past year, and I think more than likely it's going to continue for the future. So it makes it easier to interview a lot of people. Doesn't require you to travel to all the programs, and it gives you an opportunity to interact and interview from overseas. You can go online to find links to the accredited training programs. The ACGC has a link and status of each program, so that this would be a great place to start your studying of the different programs and creating spreadsheets for those that you're interested in and might plan to apply to. But you can find lists of these in multiple places, but the Accreditation Council, I think, is the right place to start with because these are accredited programs in the US and Canada. I mentioned that we have a national match, and that is part of the Association of Genetic Counseling Program Directors, AGCPD. And this is a little known website, so I just pointed out to you here because they have a special tab for prospective students. So these are the program directors in the US and Canada describing for prospective students characteristics and experiences and how to consider the national match and what we're looking for. So again, I think online homework is everything for getting yourself prepared to apply for genetic counseling. The National Matching Service is actually a separate organization altogether, and it has its own URL, even though it was created by the AGCPD. AGCPD hired it, so to speak, to run the match. But it's also a place where information exists on how does this match work. And I would also encourage somebody that was serious about admission to genetic counseling in the US to really become familiar with the match process. There is a new match waiver process. It actually costs $100 US to apply for the national match, and costs begin to accelerate when you apply to multiple programs. I think it's not uncommon to spend $50 per application at different universities. So there's an opportunity to actually have that $100 waived. And this is a brand new, just announced opportunity for individuals that might need financial support. How else could you get ready for this? I think it's really important to communicate with programs. Our programs are wide open. We put on our website, for instance, our students, they have bios that show you types of experiences that they had coming in from undergrad and their background, so to speak. But it also has their emails because they are wide open books that are happy to talk to prospective students. You might see if a program offers any special information sessions. Right now, there's a lot of information being provided online and through Zoom meetings at multiple programs. Some courses offer online courses for prospective students. I also suggest mentorship opportunities as really one of the most satisfying ways to consider the field, is to connect with a genetic counselor and ask them to mentor you up and getting prepared for the field. There's ways that you can find genetic counselors at findageneticcounselor.com. That's part of the NSGC. But I've also mentioned all of these organizations, each of which you should become familiar with as the leading or professional organizations for genetic counselors in the US. And the reason I want you to be familiar with them is wherever genetic counseling evolves, these types of organizations and underpinning will become part of the profession. So understanding how it's evolved in the US becomes important for anybody in other parts of the world that are looking at developing training, etc. I've listed a few of the resources here, and most of these URLs are also embedded in the slides, which I hope the group will share with you. But I also know that your work in doing this exploration will bring you even more questions. And yes, I see 40 different things in the chat. I can't read the chat, but I'm going to leave it there and see what kind of natural questions have come up from the group and hope that I can answer some.
Thank you so much, Janice. This was a very informative talk. I really enjoyed it. Even though I'm a practicing genetic counselor here in the United States, I'm always so humbled and also impressed to hear how this profession grew from just a small few people to now thousands of genetic counselors, and how it's continuing to grow exponentially, and being and the need in all of these subspecialty clinics and the labs and everything. It's just, it always just impresses upon me so much. And I think it also sort of highlights the need for the profession in other countries, especially countries like Pakistan, where we know that there is a lot of genetic disorders and a lot of genetic conditions, and we need people to be knowledgeable and address them more so than what's going on currently. But so thank you so much for this talk, really. I think you have answered so many questions that a lot of our attendees have been thinking about. But we do have still a whole bunch of questions in the chat, and I've been making a list, so I'm going to go down. And there are a lot. So if you want to keep the answers kind of short and quick, so you can keep moving, I want to get to everyone's question. So the first question was, is a person trained outside the USA eligible to sit for the accreditation test in the United States?
Say it again. If a person was trained outside.
So if they've gone to a genetic counseling program, say in one of the countries that has one, are they eligible to sit for the test, the certification examination?
So I always have to point to those organizations who have their policies on their website. So the American Board of Genetic Counseling would be the site that would have that policy. But as I understand it, if that country has a full-on accreditation process in place for their educational programs, that the programs are accredited, and a registration process that they have a potential for having accessibility to the exam. It's not simply an open door. There's a requirement that there's substantial, as I said, professionalization, both in the standardization of the accreditation process and the registration process. So I would point to the ABGC for the policy.
Sounds good. So the next question is, can we choose to become a genetic counselor after a master's in genomics and proteomics?
You can come do a Master of Science in Genetic Counseling after you've gotten that master's, and that would be a very valuable background in the field. But in for instance, the US, you wouldn't be able to call yourself a genetic counselor with that master's degree. I just want to be clear about that. You'd have to do a master's in genetic counseling. But I would love to have that background.
Next question is the GRE required for the University of South Carolina?
Currently, it is. And part of that is I have been trying to evaluate myself and my faculty about the impact of not having the GRE. And we're looking at some data right now to determine if we don't have any standardized tests, would we be able to make the type of determination we want to make for. So at the moment, it is currently required.
Next question is, how are second time round applicants viewed by the admissions committee?
I love that question. Thank you so much. And we give second round and third round applicants our very focused attention because we know that they have been really trying. And so, yes, we read absolutely every application front to back, backwards and forward, and then we reread the second applicants. And we're very interested to know what they've learned in the year between, for instance, or what they've been doing experiential wise. So we'll be looking over what they've been doing and what's changed in their application. But sometimes those individuals are showing you that there's nothing more than genetic counseling that would serve them as a profession, and they're very passionate, and that's exactly who you want to train as a genetic counselor. So we're very careful with those individuals.
Okay, very good. So the next is a comment and then a question. So this is from Misbah. And Misbah says, hi, everyone. Hello, everyone. I'm Misbah Hanif, and I'm from Pakistan. The Pakistani Society of Medical Genetics is in the process of starting a genetic counseling program. Yes, we really hope to do that in the future, definitely. And Misbah says that she is privileged to be one of the first trainees, and she is being trained by Dr. Ijaz and Aisha in a informal program. So that's going on through NICH. And Misbah wants to know, are there any opportunities for her to come to the United States to do electives or shadowing any genetic counselors? And second part, are there any grants available for such trainee students from developing countries?
Yeah. That's such a great question. It's an important question. Unfortunately, in genetic counseling, there's just not a lot of money, period, for anybody. Even US trained counselors don't get much support while they're in training. So I am not aware of any US grants that would bring people from developing countries in for training, unfortunately. And I think it would be unique, but it would probably be a one-on-one thing that there's no conduit to come through, like, oh yes, here, apply to this program or that program, but a connection with a training program and perhaps a special experience for one individual or a small number of individuals is possible. Probably have to be externally funded though, not by the US program.
Okay. So our next question is, what are the options for someone who is in the middle of a different career? For example, someone who has a PhD in genetics and they have a faculty position. What are the options for them if they want to become a genetic counselor? Do they also need to go for a master or some other training?
To be honest, they really still need to do the master's in genetic counseling. And I have currently a PhD clinical psychologist that wants to be a genetic counselor, and she's changing her career. And I've had several careers changers come through. And we have figured out which things she might exempt out of, but others that she still would need to have in order to become a genetic counselor. In the end, regardless of what your PhD might be in, you still need to train in the communication skills, et cetera, and be part of that supervised field work. And so it's still the requirement to go through the full master's program.
Yes, thank you, Janice. And I'm going to add to that. In my program, I went to a different program than where Janice is. I went to the one at Stanford University. And in my class, I had one of my peers had done a PhD in molecular genetics, and she was still going through the genetic counseling program. And another one of my colleagues, she was a journalist for the New York Times, and then hers was a complete career change, and she was now doing her master's in genetic counseling. So the next question is, would postgraduate courses, such as the ones offered by the University of Cincinnati, help someone combat a low GPA in their undergrad?
It's true that if somebody has a low GPA in their undergrad, well, let's just talk about low GPA. In general, most graduate schools across the United States, not just genetic counseling training programs, most graduate schools think 3.0 would be about where the academic cutoff would be for graduate level education. So under 3.0 would be considered a low GPA. I would say it's just depending on what you're talking about. Yes, it would be important to show that you could do the science level coursework. And yes, sometimes doing another type of graduate education or other education to show that you have that ability and demonstrate the content level would be important to combat it. There's a place where a standardized test helps a program if somebody has a low GPA, but they also can demonstrate on a standardized test that they have a content area that predicts that they will be able to build on that knowledge in a graduate level coursework of science. focus. So it's always person to person. It's always the individual. It's hard to just give a cutoff or a statement, but looking at the whole individual, that might be helpful.
Okay, next question. Are GCA, genetic counseling assistant positions open to international students, seeing as most positions are hybrid or virtual these days?
I think you should go for it. I absolutely think you should go for it. And I can't speak for every GCA position that exists, but you're right. Many of them are hybrid and remote, and why wouldn't it be an opportunity? There's no reason not to, and those are often great proving grounds for graduate education, genetic counseling.
Does the USC program offer graduate assistantships or TA positions for students in their genetic counseling program?
We have a couple of slots in our match. There's actually one assistantship that you can match into, and it allows for reduced tuition, in-state tuition level instead of out-of-state tuition level. So that's part of our match program. But across the University of South Carolina, our students often will get assistantships in other departments. It's not offered out of the program, but they might, for instance, be a TA in the nursing school, and that might be their part-time job, 10 hours a week, and it affords them an in-state tuition level. Thankfully, at our program, you can apply for legal residency. This doesn't apply to international students, but it does apply to US students. They can apply for legal residency and get in-state tuition their second year.
Okay. So you've answered this question before, but I'm gonna ask it anyway because it's phrased differently. Can someone directly give the ABGC test for license if she has already has a master's or a PhD degree in human genetics outside the United States?
No. They have to go through a process, and it would have to only be if they had been in a genetic counseling training program in another country that was very well developed in their accreditation standards, that the ABGC has recognized those standards. And that's can be said to be unfortunate in that it doesn't feel like it's very open, but I've come to terms with that in terms of the very concrete set of standards that has been put in place and wanting to keep that to the level at which it's evolved over 50 years. I do understand the policy.
So the next question is, do you need to have a 4-year college degree for you to be accepted into the US genetic counseling program? What if you're from a country with British patterned university education where it's a 3 years degree?
If it's an equivalent of a bachelor's degree, it would be acceptable, but it would have to have some sort of translation. The training program, the graduate university that you're applying to would have to be able to recognize. And that's sometimes the applicant can provide that information to explain up front that this looks like 3 years, but it's the equivalent of a bachelor's degree.
Okay. So the next question is, in their application, in their CVs, do seminars such as this one count as informational experience?
Yes.
And is that okay to add in our application?
Well, yes, that'd be great. I look forward to seeing some of those on the personal statements and CVs in the future.
Very good. I'm glad that we can help with that. Okay, so next question. Is previous psychology coursework mandatory for the University of South Carolina program?
It's not mandatory at our program. It's not a prerequisite. It is at many other programs. And part of the reason I didn't put it as a prerequisite is my own thought process is that you don't really learn a lot about communication skills in introduction to psychology class.
Right.
So we can train a lot of what we need to train without having that content as a prerequisite. But many programs require it.
Okay. So this is somewhat of a subjective answer, but which country is the best to get a GC education and licensing? I saw many American universities offering masters, but there are a few universities in the UK, Canada, and only one in Australia to offer this degree.
No, there's two in Australia, Sydney and Melbourne. No, the countries you just named are very well evolved, and the Canadian programs, there's 4 that are accredited by the American Council for Genetic Counseling, Accreditation Council for Genetic Counseling. And that's just a North American thing that's evolved, but the UK and Australia have very well developed education programs. And I think you really should look into those in terms of your future and where you hope to work, and what might you bring to the country in which you work. I do not feel that the US is the be all and the end all. And I do feel like these other training programs that are evolving and have evolved for many, really decades, are extremely valuable programs. I didn't feel like I could speak with them with authority, but I have told you as a group that you need to explore online every single program you're interested in, including international outside the US.
Okay, and I think the next one is a comment. So CAGC licensure is a must to practice in Canada after a master's in genetic counseling international degree. And the format is similar to the ACGC exam.
You're asking me?
It's not a phrase with a question, so I'm thinking maybe it's a comment, but do you want to comment on that? The Canadian.
It's a certification, just like the ABGC is a certification exam. It's a certification exam, and it would be similarly expected of a person that was going to practice in Canada.
Okay.
And
So
I would say, like, UK and Australia have their own processes for registration too. So these might not be exams in these cases, more like portfolios, and the process is called registering as a genetic counselor. So each country will evolve their own policies, and to stay current with it, really, their professional society websites are where you go to see current policy.
Okay, so the next question is the National Match Service also available for international students applying to be a genetic counselor in the United States?
Yes, and actually it would be a requirement to participate in the match.
Okay. And then the next question you've already answered, but is a degree necessary for obtaining a license? And the answer to that is yes. A master's in genetic counseling is necessary to get a license,
Yes,
regardless of if you have a PhD in some other field of genetics.
that's right.
So moving on, what advice do you have for students from countries where genetic counseling isn't yet a profession, but want exposure to the field?
You know, most likely in your country, there are geneticists and perhaps genetic laboratories, and I would come alongside those individuals and participate in their patient care if it's appropriate and possible. Hopefully there's laboratory services in that country as well, if you can get exposed to that. There are certainly patients, and perhaps there's some sort of patient organization that you can participate with to expose yourself to people that are working through and living with genetic conditions. So I would come alongside. It doesn't have to be with a genetic counselor. 50 years ago, there were no genetic counselors. And for the first 20 years, they were very few and far between, right? So realize that most of us came up without genetic counselors to talk to, but we knew we wanted to become. So you can gain valuable experience outside of working with a genetic counselor.
I'm going to add a short answer to that question because I was in exactly that boat. I was in Karachi in Pakistan, and there were no genetic counselors for me to shadow or work alongside. And I contacted, like Janice was saying, it's really important to research the programs you want to apply to. And I contacted some of the program directors and I asked them for suggestions as to what I could do to get that experience. And in the end, I ended up working as a social support coordinator for patients who had drug-resistant TB, tuberculosis. And my job really involved just talking to them and counseling them and just figuring out what their problems were and what it would take for them to stay on their antibiotic regimen, which was a 9-month-long treatment plan for these patients. And that was something very, very different from genetic counseling, but that was enough to count for my experience because I was involved with patients, communication, figuring problems out and trying to solve them. So,
Yeah. Wonderful.
okay, and now just a few more questions left. And someone had answered to that and just saying you can volunteer in different places for exposure. And thanks for a wonderful presentation, Professor. I'm currently pursuing an MPhil in genetics. So that's, I think, master's in philosophy, no, in genetics. What would you suggest? Would you suggest that she starts a career in genetic counseling?
First of all, I don't know what that degree is. Wow.
It's a master's in genetics degree.
Oh, well, that's wonderful. I can't tell you whether you should pursue it. I think it depends on your passion for the science and whether you want to start to serve patients. So if you have that drive, and that's something that's similar among all genetic counselors, I know there is a drive and there's a motivation and there's a sense of, Mila, you could probably agree with me that there's a privilege to be working in this field. It's an absolute privilege to serve patients at important points of their lives. And it depends on whether you feel that kind of connection to it. Example being this, I always say this, I talk with my friends and they work in business or they work in insurance or they work, and I don't understand what value they get out of their work because I get to work with people and not just work with people, but work with people at very important points in their lives and decisions and building their families. And there couldn't be anything more meaningful in my mind. It really, each person might have their own particular passion, but that's mine, and will depend on the drive and your interest in your internal passion.
Definitely, it's a good answer. So last question, and then there's just a whole bunch of comments which are thanking you for the really amazing presentation. But the last question is, what are some core beliefs for the program at USC and also their efforts for the JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion issues and concerns that are currently being focused on in genetic counseling?
Thank you so much for that question. I love that. I will just talk about core philosophies a little bit first. I mean, I get asked a lot by students, what's different about your program? And things I'll say about my program is that it's based in reality. We sit inside of a working medical center and there are 8 genetic counselors that are both teaching students, but also serving patients. So we are real genetic counselors teaching genetic counselors how to be genetic counselors. And we have a very robust community engagement program because we truly believe you're here to serve your community. So our students are out serving patients, writing about genetics for patients, serving high schools and colleges to teach more about the field in general. We've had that from the beginning, not just because we know that the lived experience of patients are not in the classroom and they are not in the books that you're reading or the articles you're researching, but they're out in the community in the lives of people. And we also feel like it's your role as a professional to reach out to your community. It's not about them coming to you, it's about you going to them. Those are philosophies that have existed from the beginning. Yes, our entire profession, especially in the United States, has needed to evolve itself. It's been really, in some ways, very closed for reasons that have not been well understood. I don't think it's on my website just yet, but as part of our self-study, we've dug into our program, and we have multiple initiatives underway that will increase diversity in the profession as a whole. And I kind of think of them as local, regional, and national opportunities that we have. One is we are increasing our outreach to our historically Black colleges and universities. I live in South Carolina, which the population is about 1/3 African American, and we have we call historically Black colleges and universities. But we're also outreaching methodically to public universities that have very diverse student populations to teach about the career opportunity and hopefully spark that interest so that in 5 years I see a personal statement that said, a University of South Carolina student came to my college class and talked about. And that has happened. So we know that it's effective. The other things we're doing more regionally is we have a summer internship opportunity where students come work with us, the faculty, for 6 weeks. And we are focusing that to be an opportunity for somebody that's of an unrepresented population in our field in the North America and the US specifically. Nationally, we have an online course that explores the field of genetic counseling. We've been doing since 2015. It's called Genetic Counseling Career for the Future, and it gives a big picture overview of the field. And we are offering to connect with individuals of underrepresented background to reduce the tuition for those individuals, if that would help them get exposed to the field. In our match process, we have created another opportunity this past year to provide a LEND fellowship. That's a special leadership education in neurodevelopmental disorders that's designed or reserved for somebody of an underrepresented background. We have now a total of 3 LEND fellowships. And then this coming year in 2022, there will be posted a diversity scholarship. It'll be a grant coming into the program for someone of underrepresented background. Multiple ways I'm sort of explaining the other things that we're doing inside our curriculum is that we have completely revised all of our literature that our students read in an open reading list in their first year. And it's infused with cultural insights and infused with diversity issues, especially focus on US issues that are going on. To help genetic counselors in training appreciate all peoples of all identities. And the last thing I can think of off the top of my head, these are a long list, is that we have created an awareness piece for anybody that participates in our training program. Guest lecturers, we invite many, many geneticists to lecture, and other clinicians from our community, that they will infuse their presentations with representative information that shows genetic conditions in all peoples, that shows cultural insights from multiple perspectives, and is completely aware of the issues that relate to importance of recognizing all peoples. And that I would say is the beginning, not the end, but that gives you an example of things that we're thinking of, at least the ones I can pull off the top of my head.
Thank you. That I like that ending note, so we can end on it being the future.
Yeah.
It's perfect for this seminar. And Janice, really, I just want to thank you for all the information you shared with us today. And there are a whole bunch of thanks coming in the chats as well. Everyone really enjoyed your presentation, appreciated everything that you shared. So with that, if you haven't already, please complete the Google form, the survey form. The link was pasted in the chat. And if you would like to receive emails from us about upcoming events, then again, fill that out so that we can add you onto our listserv. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mala.
Thank you so much.
I've enjoyed it. Enjoyed everything about it. So thank you for the opportunity.
Great.
Bye now.
Bye, everyone. We will see you next month.